This new Swift has almost immediately become the second best-selling car in the country. So what makes it click when most of the other 10 bestsellers in India happen to be SUVs? And do you really need to look at an alternative like the Hyundai Grand Nios? Or does paying a small premium for something larger like the Toyota Glanza make sense?
Now the Swift is the newest car here and it really does show as soon as you step inside. And that's mainly down to how it's designed. But this really quite smart, modern look to it, which the other two don't quite match up to. And you notice that with this sort of silver band in the middle, just the layered sort of effect to the dash, the different textures that you have here, and even the more modern, more sort of slim horizontal theme that you find in so many cars, that's been repeated here with the air vents and just the general arrangement of all the controls. Having said that, what isn't quite as nice is how it's finished. I mean, this all black cabin, it really does make this space look dark and the most compact here, even though it actually isn't. And really, the way the vents function, they really could have been off, or even say how this window rolls down, you notice the sort of door card moving. These are things that maybe we don't expect anymore, even in an entry-level car like this one.
This is where the Glanza or the Baleno makes sense. Its angular dash theme is still smart, and while the plastics aren't all too different, there's more in the way of satin and gloss black finishes to uplift the space. The latter may have a bad rep, but it does the job in this context. Adding to the sense are the well-placed soft surfaces on the doors and center armrest. This armrest is also one of the few small but effective touches that further add to the premium feel. The telescopic steering adjustment and head-up display being the others. Also, the beige theme specific to the Glanza is a better choice than the blue in the Baleno in our opinion.
But having said that, this is still a Maruti Suzuki, so some things are always right. For example, the controls, they fall to hand easily. Everything is within reach. The dials, they're really quite crisp and easy to read. And just the way everything is arranged, it does make you feel very close to the car. You feel like you're in a sporty car, which the Swift always was. So in that sense, it's good. And having said that, with these new generations of Maruti Suzukis, the company has stepped its game up.
In a surprising turn, the Glanza and Swift also offer a better infotainment package. The 9.1-inch touchscreen in these cars is larger than the 8-inch one in the Hyundai. It also happens to be more fluid and has sharper displays, making for a more cohesive experience. The Hyundai does have physical controls, but wireless Android Auto Apple CarPlay is a big boon in the Maruti Suzuki cars. We think Hyundai could have put its biggest screen, say from the Creta, in the way Maruti Suzuki has here. All the three give you analog gauges, but the ones in the Swift and Glanza again do it better with the clean, smart style and larger fonts. These also give you a color MID instead of the smaller black and white one in the Nios. An aberration with the Swift is that the touchscreen intrudes onto your field of vision at certain seat heights.
So then why would you want the Nios just in terms of its interior? Well, to start with, you realize immediately that it feels quite bright and vibrant and airy inside because of the color scheme that Hyundai has used, this grey and this sort of off-whitish theme. It really does add to the sense of space, even though this really is the narrowest cabin here and you sit really quite close to your passenger here. And the thing that Hyundai does now, there aren't any soft materials aside from the ones that you have on the steering wheel. It's the least of all the three cars here. But you have that perception of quality, that perception that you got something that is more expensive than what you paid for. And you notice that with the satin finish here, or just the heft with which the air vent functions or these climate controls function. Now that sense of quality also extends to the seats. You have a bit of leatherette around the edges. It's not fully fabric like the other two cars here. And yeah, in terms of underside support in the front, it's actually better than the other two. But where the other two score really highly is in terms of the back support. This one really is quite thin, the seat back. You don't get a separate head restraint, which is quite a big miss, I must say, in this age of where safety has come into the forefront. So yeah, while the seats look great and to some degrees they do help you, in terms of overall front seat comfort, I would pick the other two between the Swift and the Glanza.
The Nios claws back ground with its practicality. You have 3 charge ports on the front, unlike the quite inconvenient single Type A port on the Swift and Glanza, aside from the wireless charging that all 3 offer. It also has good sized door pockets, although the Swift is quite hampered at the rear in this aspect. The Glanza's wider cabin helps its case in this regard, especially in the central tunnel. The Nios only makes do with a 12-volt outlet in the rear, the Maruti Suzuki based offerings giving you both Type A and C charging.
Now, one of the reasons, and this might possibly be the biggest reason for you to move upper segment over the Swift or the Nios, would be the added space that you get here. Now, in that regard, the Glanza really does, or even the Baleno really does deliver. You have 70 mm more wheelbase than either the Swift or the Nios, and that really shows. I mean, there's a massive amount of knee room for me compared to the other two, of course. So even if you are close to 6 feet tall, you will be comfortable here, which is something you can't say of the Nios and Swift. And for adults, this is a much more comfortable space. Of course, considering that this car is also wider, 3 people abreast will be the most comfortable here. As you can see, I'm in the middle seat, I'm still comfortable. Now, I must say there's not a lot of difference in terms of headroom, of course. All three are similar. Maybe the Nios is the largest, but there is a difference in terms of seat comfort. This gives you the most amount of under-thigh support. The Swift and the Nios are slightly a grade lower. The Nios may be slightly better. And then coming to the seat back. Now again, in the Nios, it's a bit too flat. The cushioning is a bit too firm for long distance comfort, which the two Marutis do better. In the Glanza, I think one miss, considering it's from a segment higher, is that you don't get a center armrest. Now the other two don't get it either, but for something that comes at a higher price, this was expected. You get a center headrest in the Nios, which does help with safety. Now the Swift and Nios are dimensionally very similar, but in the back seat you do notice that you are a bit more cramped in the Hyundai. Mainly because this seat is sort of a bit closer to you, just don't have enough leg room. Maybe it's something to do with the boot, I don't know what it is. Or it could just be that the seat back, it's reclined to a greater angle, which is comfortable, but I don't know how it will be over longer journeys.
The Toyota Glanza's greater footprint doesn't necessarily make for the most presence. It's 130 mm longer and 20 mm wider, while also being 20 mm shorter, but the Swift grabs more eyeballs. It's that iconic look that Maruti Suzuki has nurtured quite well. The new one is a good step forward with the clamshell bonnet and the more simplified front with the wide grille. The lighting and the prominent shoulder line further add a styling finesse you usually don't find at this price point. The more compact rear may not be a great touch for some, but the more conventional door handles do make life easier. The Baleno has always been the more grown-up foil to the Swift, and despite some of the added flash that you get with this Toyota version, that thought still sticks. So the flatter bodywork and the simpler roofline and lighting has a degree of sophistication to it, but it's not something that will get you a lot of attention. The Hyundai Grand i10 Nios has been around the longest of the three here, although it did go through a minor facelift last year. It's no taller than the Swift, but the narrow tracks lended that Hyundai tall roof sense. It's got a touch more finesse to its detailing than the Marutis, with the flashier grille arrangements and the texturing around the more conservative glass area. But it's somehow missing the draw of the Swift, and we don't like that fog lamps have been deleted with this update.
Now you will more often than not use these cars as regular city commuters, but that doesn't mean that you won't be doing road trips in these. And for that you will need some degree of space right in the boot. And in that respect, the Nios is actually the least on paper at 260 litres, but that's not really true in practice. In practice, you will notice that it has the widest opening and the lowest lip of all the three cars here. So putting stuff in is the easiest. That being said, the space itself is not very deep. As you can see, this is the kind of space that we have. And another sort of disadvantage is that you don't get a 60-40 split. So if you have to carry more stuff at a pinch, you really can't do that without a lot of effort. Now the new Swift only has about 5 litres more than the Nios at 265 litres, but you will notice that putting stuff in is a bit more of a hassle. You have to lift it slightly higher, and the lip is a bit deeper here. But you will notice that even though it's 5 litres more only, there is a lot more space here for you to put small packs or whatever else that you might want to carry aside from your usual bags. So that is a good touch for what is essentially a car that's not very bigger than the Nios. Now the Glanza is a whole size larger than the other two cars, and of course that reflects in the boot space. At 318 litres, it's notably higher. If you notice, I've managed to keep this bag separate sideways from the overnighter that I've been putting it on in the other two cars. And yeah, the lip is the highest and the opening is the smallest. So if you had a big bag, getting that in is going to be quite a task, and even lifting bags out is much more difficult than the other two. But yeah, for space for say a short weekend road trip, this is the only car of the three that you can actually pack well and then still have enough space for you.
Here's a look at the kind of features and safety equipment that the three cars have to offer. The Nios performed the best in our braking tests, taking the least distance to stop. The Swift was not up to the mark. It took a longer distance than even the Glanza and would also lose composure in panic braking.
Now this is the Swift, so it's not surprising that this also feels the sportiest when you first get into it. For example, the dash, the way it's curved out, so that gives you a sense of closeness just to the whole experience. Same way in which the center console is sort of angled towards you quite noticeably, that also helps. You sit also reasonably lower than the Nios for sure, and very similar to the Glanza, so all of those make you feel that this is a car that likes to be driven.
With these new models, Maruti Suzuki has done much to engineer out that tinny, flimsy feel that has always been criticized. But still, it's the Grand i10 Nios that has a more substantial sense on the move. It's also the most maneuverable in traffic with its more compact dimensions and slightly taller seating.
But of course, the big change with this generation of the Swift is that new Z series engine. And yeah, on paper, there is a distinct disadvantage to the Glanza, the older K series that it replaces.
It's lost one cylinder and makes 8 PS and 1 Nm less than the 90 PS and 113 Nm of the older motor. In a broader sense, it's now right in the ballpark of the Nios with its 83 PS and 114 Nm. But our real-world performance tests show that there's more nuance to this. The Swift is only 0.8 seconds slower than the Glanza in the 0 to 100 kmph run, doing it in 12.8 seconds. But more surprisingly, the two managed identical acceleration times in gear, so there hasn't been a great performance dip in practice. We couldn't get our hands on a manual Nios, which makes its numbers not fully relevant to the other two, but we think the Hyundai should be within this range when spec'd with a manual. The EMT is great for new drivers of course, but it must be said that even with the manuals, the Maruti Suzuki derived cars here are easy to get used to. You can drag them along in a high gear often and the controls are light and precise. The clutch doesn't take too much effort and the gear shifts feel the same with their well-judged throws and precise action.
But I must say that the Swift, compared to the other two engines here, really does feel the peppiest of the line. So when you're in the city, say about at 1 to just below 3000 RPM, it feels the most eager to accelerate, even more than the K series, which has 7 or 8 horsepower power advantage. None of these engines will stall easily, especially this one. You can just put it in second gear and crawl and nothing seems to happen. So that's great if you're a new driver. All of these make driving the Swift really quite easy, especially considering that the Swift in this 3-cylinder form, there's really quite a few vibrations that you feel and even that grumble. But having said that, the more you rev it, it's the Maruti engines that really shine. They have that nice fruity tone to it. The K series is the best, this one close second behind.
So when highway driving, the Glanza is the easiest to extract performance out of. But does this still justify an entirely new engine? One of the main draws seems to be the astounding efficiency. We managed over 25.7 kmpl on the highway in the Swift, a notable improvement over the Glanza. There are similar improvements in the city numbers. The Swift managed 19.2 kmpl here, while the Glanza did 17.9. The Glanza is only 10 kgs heavier than the Swift, so the gains have come largely from the engine. Now, as has always been the norm, the Hyundai is some way behind with its 14.2 kmpl city and 20.1 kmpl highway figures.
Now the Swift may have that boy racer-ish image of being a great driver's car, but I must say that in this comparison, I find that the Glanza seems to find a better balance between all things considered. Now, of course, the Swift, it has that slightly darty feel, it has that, it changes, it seems to change direction a bit more sharply, it keeps you engaged a bit more in regular city driving in terms of low speed driving or even around bends when you're going slightly faster.
The Glanza's longer wheelbase and steering that still has some trouble recentering means it doesn't quite have the fizz of the Swift, but it does have a more secure overall sense to it. So it's still poised around bends but feels quite a bit more planted than the other two on a high-speed cruise. The larger and wider wheels are a factor. The other two don't quite handle wavy tarmac as well, making for slightly more tiring long-distance driving.
Now, as for the Nios, it wasn't the sharpest handler ever, and that continues as it's a great city car, I must say, with its dimensions and with a quite light steering. It's probably the easiest to maneuver in traffic, which is great. But you never quite feel as connected to it as you do in either of these Marutis or Toyotas. Around bends, you will notice that you are mostly guessing what the car is doing, which is not a bad thing. Most people won't drive it as quickly, but for that little bit of engagement, that little bit of fizz that you want in your daily commute, these two, the Swift and the Glanza, they do deliver that bit more. Now these new generation of Maruti Suzukis, at lower speeds, it feels the more polished of all the three cars here. And yeah, as long as the road is fine, that sense continues pretty much unchanged, which is great. For the same price or maybe even lesser, you're getting a car that feels more premium. But I must say that when the road does become worse, you do feel the bumps a bit more, and especially the bigger bumps, they seem to thud through. All three of them actually do a good job. The Glanza more often than the Nios. The Nios is noisier more often.
At rupees 10 lakh on road, this Nios AMT undercuts the manual Swift, which makes for a great deal. But we think the 10.63 lakhs for the Swift is well worth it. You don't quite get the quality or refinement, but there's better tech on board, and the driving experience makes journeys generally more engaging and comfortable. But the big draw for owners will be the significant efficiency advantage. You will make up the added upfront cost over the course of your ownership cycle. But we think the Glanza is the most complete package. Yes, you can choose the Swift, but push your budget a bit more to rupees 11.63 lakh, and this jump makes its value felt. It's a genuine family car, has some great headlining features, and drives more maturely in a greater number of real life scenarios.